Can greed destroy someone who already has everything? That's the question this Chinese drama kept bringing me back to. While everyone else was chasing power, wealth, and recognition, one woman quietly proved that wisdom will always outlast ambition driven by greed. Welcome back to Lavvie Talks. I'm Lavvie, and if you love movies with deeper meaning, you're in the right place. Every film has more than a plot. It has psychology, life lessons, and choices that reveal how people think and behave. So, let's get into today's review. This drama follows Clare Grant, a brilliant woman who suddenly finds herself living in a historical era. Now, if you've watched enough Chinese dramas, you know the trope someone from the modern world ends up in the past. But what makes this one stand out isn't the time travel. It's what Clare brings with her. She doesn't have superpowers. She doesn't rely on martial arts. She doesn't even have powerful allies in the beginning. What she has is something far more dangerous. She understands people. And honestly, that's what made me enjoy her character so much. From the moment Clare arrives, people underestimate her. The scholars think she's inexperienced. The ministers think she's too outspoken. Even her own father worries that her bold personality is going to bring disgrace to the family. But Clare refuses to become the quiet, obedient woman everyone expects her to be. Instead, she challenges people head-on. She questions traditions that don't make sense. She refuses to stay silent simply because someone holds a higher position than her. Now, I know that kind of personality isn't for everyone. Some people might watch this drama and think Clare is arrogant or even a little too ruthless. But I actually think that's what makes her such an interesting female lead. She isn't trying to be liked. She's trying to solve problems. There's a huge difference. One thing I noticed is that many of the officials in this drama cared more about appearances than results. They were so focused on preserving tradition that they forgot the whole purpose of leadership is to improve people's lives. Clare, on the other hand, asks a completely different question. What actually works? And that's where her modern way of thinking gives her an advantage. One of the first major moments that caught my attention was when she had to prove herself before the emperor and the imperial court. Everyone expected the famous scholar Julia Moon to outshine her because Julia represented everything the court admired: education, tradition, reputation, and elegance. Clare represented uncertainty. She challenged accepted ideas. She wasn't afraid to disagree with respected officials. Naturally, everyone expected her to fail. Instead, she shocked the entire court. That scene reminded me of something we still experience today. People often confuse confidence with competence. If someone speaks eloquently, dresses professionally, or has an impressive title, we automatically assume they know what they're doing. Psychologists call this the halo effect. It's a cognitive bias where one positive trait such as status or reputation influences our overall judgment of a person's abilities. Julia benefited from that bias. People assumed she was the best simply because she had built a strong reputation. Clare didn't have that advantage. She had to prove herself every single time. And isn't that how life often works? Sometimes you can have incredible ideas, but because you don't have the right title, the right background, or enough experience, people dismiss you before you've even had a chance to speak. The interesting thing is that Clare never wastes time trying to convince people she's intelligent. She simply solves the problem. And eventually, even her critics are forced to acknowledge her ability. That's a lesson I think applies far beyond this drama. Sometimes the best response isn't arguing with people or trying to prove your worth. Sometimes it's simply becoming so good at what you do that the results speak for themselves. Another thing I appreciated about Clare is that she isn't driven by ego. She doesn't solve problems just so people will praise her. She solves them because someone has to. There's actually a psychological concept that fits her personality quite well: pragmatic thinking. Pragmatic thinkers focus on outcomes rather than appearances. Instead of asking, "Will people like my idea?" they ask, "Will this actually solve the problem?" That's exactly how Clare approaches every challenge. Whether she's dealing with corrupt officials, political rivals, or impossible situations, she's always looking for the most effective solution, not necessarily the most popular one. And I think that's why the emperor becomes so fascinated by her. Unlike everyone else in the court, Clare isn't trying to impress him. She's trying to fix the empire. That alone makes her different from almost everyone around her. As the story progresses, Clare is given one impossible task after another. Each assignment is designed to make her fail, and each one comes from people who are convinced she's nothing more than an overconfident outsider. But what they fail to realize is that Clare isn't just thinking differently, she's thinking years ahead of everyone else, and that's where the drama starts becoming really interesting. As Clare continues proving herself, the challenges become even bigger. She's sent to Riverford, where grain prices have spiraled out of control. Merchants are hoarding food, driving up prices, and making enormous profits while ordinary people struggle just to survive. Most officials see it as an economic problem. Clare sees something different. She sees human behavior. That's one of the reasons I enjoyed this drama so much. Constantly reminds us that behind almost every economic crisis, political conflict, or family dispute, there are people making decisions based on emotions, incentives, and self-interest. Instead of confronting the merchants head-on, Clare studies what motivates them. Greed. She realizes that if greed created the problem, then greed can also become the solution. Rather than using force, she manipulates the market itself, breaking the merchants' monopoly and forcing prices back down. It's a risky strategy, but it works brilliantly. Again, that's another psychological principle at play. People often assume that intelligence is about knowing facts. But in reality, one of the highest forms of intelligence is understanding why people behave the way they do. If you understand what motivates someone, you can often predict what they'll do next. Clare understands that better than almost anyone in the drama. Then comes another crisis, the devastating locust plague. The ministers immediately begin proposing traditional solutions that have been passed down for generations. Clare, however, approaches the problem like someone from the 21st century. Instead of relying on superstition or outdated practices, she studies the insects, understands their life cycle, and comes up with a practical solution that involves using poultry to reduce the swarm. Once again, people laugh at her. Once again, she proves them wrong. Watching those scenes made me think about something psychologists call status quo bias. It's our natural tendency to stick with familiar methods simply because they're familiar, even when better solutions exist. We see this all the time in real life. Someone introduces a new idea at work. People resist it. A new technology appears. People say it'll never replace the old one. History is full of innovations that were mocked before they were accepted. Clare represents those innovators. She's willing to challenge tradition not because she dislikes it, but because she refuses to let tradition become an excuse for ignoring better solutions. Now let's talk about the theme that, in my opinion, carries this entire drama. Greed. Almost every major conflict in this story begins with someone wanting just a little bit more. More power, more influence, more recognition. And the interesting part is that many of these characters already had what most people could only dream of. Take Julia Moon, for example. She was already one of the Empire's most respected women. She had an excellent reputation, an influential position, and a future that looked incredibly promising. For anyone else, that would have been enough. But the moment Clare arrived, everything changed. Instead of focusing on her own strengths, Julia became obsessed with comparing herself to someone else. And comparison can be incredibly dangerous. There's a psychological theory called social comparison theory, proposed by psychologist Leon Festinger. It suggests that people naturally evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to others. Sometimes that comparison motivates us, but sometimes it breeds envy. The more Julia compared herself to Clare, the less satisfied she became with everything she had already accomplished. Eventually, success wasn't enough anymore. Recognition wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to be the best, and that's when ambition slowly transformed into greed. I actually found her character quite tragic, not because she failed, but because she had already won. She had reached a position that many people, especially women in that era, could never have imagined achieving. If she had simply focused on her career, continued serving the Empire, and accepted that someone else happened to be better in certain areas, she probably would have lived a remarkable life. She didn't have to become Clare's friend. She didn't even have to admire her, but she could have respected her abilities. She could have learned from her, or she could have simply stayed focused on her own path. Instead, she allowed jealousy to make every decision for her. That's something we see surprisingly often in real life. People stop measuring success by their own progress and start measuring it by someone else's achievements. The moment that happens, happiness becomes almost impossible. Because there will always be someone richer, someone smarter, someone more successful. When your happiness depends on being ahead of everyone else, you'll never feel like you've arrived. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons this drama teaches. Success doesn't usually destroy people. Comparison does. Greed convinces us that what we already have isn't enough. And before we realize it, we're risking everything just to gain something we never truly needed. As the story moves toward its conclusion, we see the same pattern repeat itself, but this time on an even bigger scale. Prince Warwick had almost everything a person could ask for. He had wealth, he had influence, he had respect. He was already one of the most powerful men in the empire, yet somehow, it still wasn't enough. Instead of protecting everything he had built, he became consumed by the desire for even more power. That obsession eventually led him to betray the very empire that had given him his status in the first place. There's an interesting concept in psychology called the hedonic treadmill. It suggests that once people achieve a goal, they quickly adapt to it and begin chasing the next one. The excitement fades, satisfaction becomes temporary, and suddenly what once felt like a dream becomes the new normal. You get the promotion, then you want another one, you buy the house. Then you want a bigger one, you reach the top. Then you start looking for an even higher mountain to climb. The problem isn't ambition. Ambition is healthy. It's what pushes us to learn, grow, and improve ourselves. The problem begins when ambition loses its purpose and becomes greed. Greed doesn't ask, "How can I grow?" Greed asks, "How can I have what someone else has?" That's exactly what happened to Prince Warwick. He wasn't content with the extraordinary position he already held. His desire for more ultimately became the very thing that destroyed him. Ironically, the people who spent the entire drama trying to bring Clare down ended up engineering their own downfall. Edward Stanton is another perfect example. Throughout the story, he spends so much time plotting against Clare that he completely loses sight of his own future. Instead of investing his energy into becoming a better strategist or serving the empire well, he channels all of it into revenge. Psychologically, this reflects what's known as a scarcity mindset. People begin to believe that someone else's success automatically means there's less success available for them. Instead of creating opportunities, they become obsessed with eliminating the competition. But success rarely works like that. Someone else's talent doesn't erase yours. Someone else's achievement doesn't diminish your own. Edward never understood that. If anything, Clare's brilliance could have challenged him to become even better. Instead, he treated her success as a personal threat, and that decision cost him everything. Meanwhile, Clare keeps doing what she's done since the very beginning. She solves problems. She stays focused on helping the empire. She doesn't waste time trying to prove people wrong. She simply lets her actions speak for themselves. That's probably my favorite lesson from the entire drama. Sometimes we're so busy trying to defend ourselves against criticism that we stop investing in our own growth. Clare does the opposite. She lets her work become her response. And eventually, even the people who doubted her are forced to acknowledge her abilities. By the end of the story, Clare helps the Emperor dismantle Prince Warwick's conspiracy, restoring peace to the empire. The people who were driven by greed, jealousy, and pride lose everything they spent years chasing. Clare, on the other hand, earns something much more valuable than power. She earns trust, she earns respect, and she earns a place where her ideas are valued, not because she demanded recognition, but because she consistently proved herself. For me, that's what makes this drama memorable. Yes, it's entertaining. Yes, the political strategies are clever. And yes, watching the villains finally face the consequences of their actions is incredibly satisfying. But underneath all of that is a story about human nature. It's about how envy quietly grows into resentment, how comparison steals our joy, how greed convinces us that what we have will never be enough, and how true wisdom often comes from solving problems instead of chasing status. I also think this drama leaves us with an important question to ask ourselves. Are we building the life we actually want, or are we constantly comparing it to someone else's? Because the moment we stop appreciating what we've achieved and become consumed by what other people have, we're already walking down the same path as the villains in this story. Overall, I thought this was a fantastic drama. It balances comedy, political strategy, and psychological insight surprisingly well. Clare is one of those female leads who doesn't rely on luck or physical strength. She wins because she's observant, adaptable, and understands people better than they understand themselves. And honestly, those are the kinds of protagonists I enjoy watching the most. My rating for this drama is 9 out of 10. If you enjoy historical Chinese dramas with brilliant strategies, memorable characters, and life lessons that stay with you long after the credits roll, then I definitely recommend giving this one a watch. Thank you so much for watching Lavvie Talks. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Do you think greed is humanity's greatest weakness? Or do you think something else causes most people to lose their way? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care and remember, every story has something to teach us.